who made the point earlier, but it was a good one, and that's, does the public really care who's doing this? They just want, tougher penalties and impaired driving, and that's a good point. It plays well on the cheap seats. I think some of the legal things that we're talking about can be arcane to members of the general public, and it's a shame because I think it does strike to our fundamental rights and some, the fundamental underpinnings of our Constitution and our Charter of Rights. They may be obscure issues, but they're important issues, and they're ones that we should be considering.
I think you're absolutely right, Jason, in terms of the legal issues, but do we really want this? My question becomes, how far does the government intervene? 0.08, and we're just going to continue to invade into people's lives. We already have a nanny state as it is. We get legislated into everything, and how far are you going to go in terms of the effect that this will have on the economy is we've already seen it in BC. I've been to BC. मैं भी 2-3 बारी BC गया ते आपदे फ्रेंड नाल बाजे हर एक डरदा हुन पीन नु even एक या दो पी के
मेरे दोस्त कोल एक रेस्टोरेंट हैगा उत्थे वैनकूवर दे विच ते डेफिनेटली उन्होंने ने मेनू जिक्र कीता सी अभी legislation ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ BC ਦੀ legislation ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ sales ਕਾਫੀ ਘਟ ਹੋਗੀ and so I guess the issue is that what about the impact on other individuals, the restaurant, the hospitality industry, is that a legitimate concern? Should we even be contemplating that or discussing that in the same breath as saving people's lives, Jason?
It's a tough balance to strike, and I don't think there would be much doubt that in the short term, if we were to lower these impaired driving limits, whether it's through these administrative means or whether it's one day changing the criminal code, that there's going to be an adjustment period, and I think people would probably be a little shy or averse to going out and having a couple drinks. But
is that, and you mentioned earlier,
but is that a concern?
Yeah, is the drop, you said 100 fatalities year over year, and now it's down to 50. So is the drop to 50, is that sustainable? Is that simply just a short-term adjustment period, and next year it'll be back up to 100, notwithstanding the drop to 0.05 in the administrative penalties in BC?
Time will tell in BC. The point I was making earlier, though, is countries that have lowered the legal limit, done it the right way, I suppose, have seen long-term drops in impaired driving.
Jason, looks like we've managed to ameliorate our technical difficulties. Caller, to see air the hanging.
Hello?
Hello, Haji, to see air there.
My point is that I'm talking about the restaurants and nightclub industry. There should be a law to penalize them if they are serving too much booze to the drivers and knowing that he's going to drive after hours and leaving the restaurant.
Well, there is a penalty. It's called commercial host liability. I've actually written an article about this when I was in law school, and there's commercial host liability. That bar owner can be sued. So if someone is injured, if an individual is overserved, and by the way, great question. If an individual is overserved in a drinking establishment and that individual then goes outside, has an accident, the victim of that accident can in fact sue that bar, that establishment, for overserving and for commercial host liability. A drinking establishment cannot serve an intoxicated patron.
And that case is a Supreme Court of Canada case. Jordan House and Menno was the first in the line of those types of cases that came out. But it's a great question. But there's an inherent difference between host liability in a commercial setting and at your house.
Well, there's social host liability as well.
Yep.
And when I wrote the article that I did on commercial host liability, I looked at the social host liability, which was just starting out at that point. But it does appear that there is some degree of liability even when you're serving in a social setting. And the difference is this: is that where you're serving alcohol for a profit, je tusi profit waste bechte ho, paise waste bechte ho, there's an enhanced duty upon you to make sure that that individual, that you don't serve an intoxicated individual, that you contact a taxi for that individual, make the appropriate arrangements for that individual.
Yeah, ਬਿਲਕੁਲ even ਜਦੋਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਘਰੇ ਵੀ ਸਰਵ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ alcohol, ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜ਼ਿੰਮੇਵਾਰੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਜੇ ਬੰਦਾ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਕਿ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਸ਼ਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਹੋਇਆ, ਪੀਤੀ ਵੀ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ, ਉਹ ਜੇ ਉਹ ਕਾਰ ਚਲਾ ਕੇ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਐਕਸੀਡੈਂਟ ਹੋ ਜਾਵੇ, ਉਹ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹਜੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਵੀ ਲਾਇਬਲ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ.
Andy, I think we've got another caller here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Hello, you're on the air.
Hello, Andy and Raj?
Yes.
Andy, I want to say that the show बहुत ਵਧੀਆ है. मैं एक दूसरा क्वेश्चन पूछना सी, जे ब्रेथलाइजर जे पुलिस चेक हैगी है ते ब्रेथलाइजर कीता ते मैं ना कीता कि what are the issues?
He's talking about a failure to blow. Yeah, Thank you very much for your call.
That's a good question, but ਆਪਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ actual ਜਿਹੜੇ DUI ਦੇ question ਹੈਗੇ ਉਹ ਅਸੀਂ answer ਹੀ ਕਰਨਾ ਜੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਈ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਈ ਹੈ legal issue ਹੈਗਾ ਰਾਜ ਦੇ office ਵਿੱਚ ਕਾਫੀ ਮਸ਼ਹੂਰ criminal lawyer Charlie Stewart ਉਹਦਾ partner ਹੈਗਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਰਾਜ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਦੇ office 'ਚ phone ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ 705-3398.
Yeah, for sure. It's an interesting question, and the failure to blow ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਫੂਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਾਰਦੇ there are consequences for that. So
it's viewed as an offense just like being impaired basically if you fail to provide a breath sample.
Yeah, that's right. But again, under that criminal under the criminal code. But ek cheez mein ironic Raj, I think we have one more call coming in.
Yeah.
Hello.
You're on the air.
Yeah, hi. This is a very good topic actually, and I'm very interested in this one, especially the point made that the law by reducing blood alcohol limit, what effect it's going to have on economy. I would beg to differ because these kind of criminal laws are not made or changed based on what effect is it going to have on economy. I mean, same law nahi hai ki aapa taxes high kita ya low kita. People who do drink in bars, they do have options: designated driver option, taxi option, transit option, or call somebody from home. So I mean, laws idha nahi bande ki economy the ki effect pena. Law should be made with respect to how many lives we can save.
That's a great question. Now, the only comment I'll have on it is that laws should not be viewed in terms of the economic consequences to bar owners, for sure. But the fact of the matter is that this law is not a criminal law. This law is an administrative law, and as such, if the province is dealing with it, then it's not necessarily a criminal law jurisdiction, and where we're not going to think about economic impacts. But this is a provincial law section, and by the way, the province is seizing your property. So the issue of property and money is very important for a provincial legislation. Jason, I think you had a comment on this?
Caller, you made a great point. And certainly in our society, it's not without precedent to make these kind of limitations and restrictions on people's behaviors based on saving lives, regardless of the economic consequences. You look over the years how we've regulated the tobacco industry and limitations on advertising and sales. So certainly we can do these sorts of things with the view of saving lives and with the economic impact not being something that really becomes a primary consideration. Again, the point I think we're trying to make is that there's a way of doing it. There's a way of doing it and putting it in the criminal code in such a way that it becomes the law of the land as opposed to going through the back door with these administrative measures. The point I was trying to make in my blog piece earlier, and I've said earlier here on the show, is that measures like this will maybe have an impact in the short term. What we've seen in the countries that do have a lower blood alcohol limit and have imposed it, there's been a decrease. They're saving more lives. There's less injuries, and I don't know. I mean, it's just anecdotal. I don't think Parisians in Paris have lost their joie de vivre and stopped going out because there's a lower blood alcohol limit. I don't think Australians have stopped enjoying their bars.
Like our caller said, we don't live in some sort of like a backwater. There's options for individuals that go out and drink, whether it's transit or taxi or.
The irony I find in the whole entire thing, and we're seeing this new omnibus legislation. ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨਾਮ ਆਪਣਾ criminal legislation ਹੋਣਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਪਹਿਲਾ show up ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਡੋਡੇ ਆਂਦੇ ਸੀਗਾ. Jason, you were there for when we did the show on Dode. The Harper government is ready to put somebody in jail for a year who has 5 grams of Dode in their pocket, but we can't lower the blood alcohol rate when there's 1,500 people a year dying from alcohol-related deaths.
Andy, I think we've got another caller on the air. Caller to see it.
ਭਈਆ ਪੁੱਛਣਾ ਸੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਜਿਵੇਂ 4 ਪੀ ਸਕਦੇ ਨੇ 4 ਮਤਲਬ
4 accounts ਦੇ ਡਰਿੰਕ ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਭਾਈ ਜੇ ਘਰ ਦੀ ਗੱਡੀ ਹੈ ਉਹਦੇ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਪੈਗ ਪੀ ਸਕਦੇ ਬਈ ਘੰਟੇ 'ਚ
ਘਰ ਦੀ ਗੱਡੀ ਹੋਈ
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਉਹਦੇ ਕਿੰਨੇ
ਘਰ ਦੀ ਗੱਡੀ ਹੋਈ ਤਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਡੇਢ ਹੀ ਪੀਓ ਤੇ
depends on the quality of ਘਰ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸ਼ਰਾਬ ਹੈਗੀ. I guess it depends. We're discussing it on a 40 proof for 40 ounce alcohol is based on it. Thanks for that amusing question.
You have here a measure, and again that measure being lowering the blood alcohol limit that could potentially save lives, an ounce of prevention, and yet that doesn't seem to be on this government's order paper. Now, we can speculate about why that is. I mean, maybe it's because there is potentially some political blowback from the hospitality industry for doing something like that. I mean, only the Conservatives can really answer that question, but it does seem ironic that a tough-on-crime government wouldn't at least take a look at a measure that's been shown in other countries to cut down on the death toll on our roads.
And to me, it just doesn't make any sense. You've taken such a hard line on drug offenses, but yet probably the most abused substance of all, we haven't moved on it at all.
Prevention's always a hard thing to sell politically. You can quantify the consequences of a crime. You can say, we put this many guys away, we're sentencing this offender to this amount of time. But actually quantifying how many crimes you've prevented by some of these other measures is usually more difficult to do. It's usually harder to sell to the public, so maybe that's why we don't see measures like this being done more quickly.
But the argument is that with the sentences, with these mandatory minimums, just sort of ਦੱਸਣਾ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਨਵੀਂ legislation ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੀ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜੀ criminal legislation ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ mandatory minimum sentence ਹੋਗੇ। ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਡਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਡੋਡਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਐਪੀਸੋਡ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ, ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਇੱਕ criminal lawyer ਆਇਆ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਉਹਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਡੋਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੈਚ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ 1 ਸਾਲ ਦੀ ਸਜ਼ਾ ਜੇਲ੍ਹ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮਿਲਣੀ ਹੈ, ਨਾ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਘਰੇ ਸਰਵ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ 1 ਸਾਲ ਜੇਲ੍ਹ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮਿਨੀਮਮ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ। ਸੋ ਉਹ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਡਿਟਰੈਂਸ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਸਾਲ ਜੇਲ੍ਹ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਹਿਣਾ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਰਨਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਇਹ ਕੰਮ। ਪਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ drunk driving ਦਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੁਛ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ।
Ultimately the government has a obligation to regulate all harmful substances, right? They'll regulate harmful emissions put into the environment. They'll regulate tobacco use. They'll regulate drugs. And of course, alcohol is actually the most abused substance of all. Alcohol causes the most societal grief of all.
Look, Raj, in a South Asian community which they call, right? Even in my family law practice, मैं सुनो example दे सकता है जिरे लोग पींदे आ।
And you know what we're going to do, Andy? That's a great. Let's take a break. Then you start the next segment by talking about the prevalence of alcohol in the South Asian community.
Sure thing.
Yeah.
पंजाबियत दी मस्ती विच रवो मलंग 24 घंटे 7 दिन सबरंग दे नाल सबरंग रेडियो 94.7 FM